The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, Macbeth by William Shakespeare, Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, and the TV series Breaking Bad by Vince Gilligan all have one thing in common, and that is a story arc that takes the protagonist and makes them eventually into something of an antagonist, even if we keep having some level of sympathy for them, but we don't really know if we should be cheering for them anymore. This protagonist to antagonist arc can be very popular with authors because there are some compelling elements in there that resonate with writers. First of all, so many writers are fascinated by morality, those gray areas between good and evil. This arc allows a writer to delve into the moral dilemmas faced by characters as they grapple with difficult choices and their consequences. This type of arc also provides a huge opportunity for in-depth character development. It allows authors to explore the motivations, flaws, and internal struggles of their protagonists as they undergo their transformations. Not every transformation is positive, and you can definitely create a pretty realistic arc that's multi-dimensional with these characters, and that's pretty great. Oftentimes, when there's a story that has a protagonist to antagonist arc, it really does evoke strong emotions in readers. And I think that some authors are drawn to that idea that they're really going to be resonating so much with their reader and creating this emotion in them. Also, there is that pleasure in the subversion of expectations. This allows authors to surprise their reader, to challenge conventional notions of heroism and villainy, and authors can enjoy playing with these expectations, creating stories that defy stereotypes and tropes. And this feels like it's full of creative freedom, but it is also full of potential problems and landmines. So that's why in this episode of the How to Be an Author podcast, I wanted to talk about this issue of the protagonist to antagonist character arc and story arc, and talk about some of the pitfalls, talk about some of the dangers and mistakes, and talk about how to do this right. Because if you do it wrong, you lose your reader. If you do it right, your reader is absolutely delighted. So let's take a deep dive into this issue of protagonist to antagonist, written in a subtle and masterful fashion. If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karena Akhavein, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. Hello and welcome to the How to Be an Author podcast. I'm your host, writing coach Karena Akhavein, PhD. And I may have a PhD in literature, but I like to make the process of writing and editing and publishing your dream book as simple as possible, because I believe that the best way to market your book is to write the next book, and I don't want you to get stuck on things that you could be getting help on. So this podcast serves as that entree into the world of writing coaching. And once you listen to this, if you want to take a deeper dive, you can go onto my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com, and you can check out some of my offerings, from one-on-one coaching to my classes and courses and workbooks. These are all ways that you can become more proficient in the craft of writing, and that you can see yourself hitting your writing goals, but also becoming proficient in the business of writing, because this is a multi-pronged approach that's so important. But today we are talking writing craft, namely writing a protagonist to antagonist arc. So what is exactly this arc? Some of you might be listening to the intro going, what is happening? This type of arc involves a gradual transformation of a character. And every story needs to have some level of transformation for a character, because if not, it's not satisfying. So we want to start off with your character in situation A, and at the end of the story, they're going to have grown and changed. But in the protagonist to antagonist arc, the character doesn't transform into someone better, they transform into something of a villain, maybe a lovable villain, but a villain nonetheless. So the way you do this in general, before we dive in more deeply, let me explain to you the basic way that you're doing this. You're starting off by establishing the protagonist's positive traits, and then you're going to introduce the conflicts that challenge their morals or beliefs. And then you show their descent into darkness through pivotal choices and experiences, highlighting the internal struggles and exterior pressures. You're going to ensure that this transformation feels organic and rooted in the character's motivations and backstory. I know, easier said than done, right? But don't worry, we're going to be talking more about this. Finally, you're going to create moments of realization or redemption for a compelling resolution. So all of this is really important. So let's talk about the major challenges that come with writing this protagonist to antagonist arc. Because number one, you've guessed it probably already, and this is why many of you actually think about it and then don't do it. It's because maintaining sympathy is crucial for your audience to keep them engaged. But it's hard when you've got a character who's making morally questionable decisions or actions, right? So that's a delicate balance. There's also the issue of balancing realism and dramatic tension. This transformation is going to have to feel believable and organic. You don't want a sudden shift. You don't want, when you have a so-called plot twist, for it to come completely out of the blue, because that's not a satisfying plot twist. That is pulling the rug out from under your reader. And we want to do that only when they look back and go, I should have known. That's it. And also, cliche is one of these things that makes its way into some of these types of stories. And it's really important to find fresh angles and motivations for your characters' descent into darkness so that you're avoiding the cliches and the predictable tropes. Finally, you have this idea of character depth. Like, your character needs to be fully realized. They can't just be a caricature. Like, they can't just be somebody who seemed okay, but they're teetering on the brink and they're a bad guy, in the background, but they feel like their flaws are all canned. If you do that, you're not going to be sustaining the reader interest, especially as your character is becoming less sympathetic or less relatable. You want to make sure that that reader is coming along with you. And that's probably, to me, kind of one of the bigger challenges, really, is giving your character just enough compelling, relatable traits to really keep the reader going, but maybe they're going to turn around, or maybe they're going to be good. I'm not saying it's right, but I understand. And there's also the issue of crafting a satisfying resolution because, if your character becomes horrible, right, there's going to be a moment of reckoning. And what is the conclusion that's satisfying for your reader? It needs to be earned and meaningful, but, is it going to be fair? Is it going to be justice being served? What's going to happen? So addressing these challenges really does require careful planning and characterization. This is going to stretch the limits of your storytelling craft, and that's really, really important. So let's talk about one of the other big issues that I touched upon very briefly in my introduction, which is that idea of creating subtle foreshadowing so that when we have the plot twist, it doesn't come completely out of the blue. Like, you had these seeds of doubt, but you also weren't completely sure, right? That's really important. So what are some of the techniques that you're going to be using to achieve this subtle protagonist to antagonist arc foreshadowing? You're going to be doing it with symbolism and imagery, for example. That's really great, right? Objects, settings, recurring motifs that subtly allude to the character's potential transformation. Another thing can be ambiguous dialogue, right? Craft dialogue that can be interpreted in multiple ways. It can hint at the character's hidden motives or conflicting emotions. The character can be expressing seemingly innocent sentiments that, upon reflection, foreshadow their eventual shift, but not for sure. And subtle behavior changes, right? Maybe your character lashes out. Maybe, they do something that's kind of subtle. They say something that could be mean, but maybe it wasn't. Or, they lift an eyebrow and they look at the person and you're like, wait, what? No, they wouldn't. But yes, they are, right? So these changes should be subtle enough to be overlooked initially, but noticeable upon re-examination. I don't know about you, but sometimes when there's a huge plot twist, I'll be like, wait, I thought I remembered them doing this thing. And I'll flip back in the book, and it's so satisfying when you find that thing where you're like, oh, I should have known. They did that thing. And that absolutely is a gift for your reader. Also, you can provide some flashbacks or memories that show the reader a little glimpse of the character's past experience or trauma, and that provides some sort of context for their current actions, and it can foreshadow future issues. Minor plot details are also great, just super minor. And how do you make them minor? How do you make them kind of discreet? You stick them in a dialogue. You put it in as just a little aside, right? And that's going to be a great way of having little breadcrumbs that get a little bit lost, but they lead towards that plot twist. Very important. And also you've got things like narrative structure that you can use, like nonlinear storytelling or alternating perspectives. And oh boy, let me tell you, that's something that I've done episodes of this podcast on, because it is really hard to create a complete story with alternating perspectives. It can be really rewarding to read this, but there are methods and techniques that you can use to do this properly. And that's a story for another time, but you can also look back through past episodes and on my blog and in my course, I teach you how to do this. So that's really important. So what are some of those character traits that you can think of that can be positive at first, but that can take a character from protagonist to antagonist? You know that a really well-written character often has strengths and weaknesses, and some of the best weaknesses are those that they think are strengths and vice versa. So for example, you've got ambition. Right? Ambition is something that's initially driving a character to succeed, and you're rooting for them because you want them to succeed. You want them to get what they want. But unchecked ambition, that can lead to unethical or immoral actions. That can cause a character to prioritize personal gain over others' well-being. It can cause them to do things that hurt other people. Pride or arrogance can be something that also can start out being kind of like you think, oh, poor thing, they're probably doing it as a defensive mechanism, whatever, and then it starts to turn into something else. Also, for example, a character who's got strong goals or who really loves someone, there's a delicate line between love or desire or goals and obsession. Right? What will they be willing to sacrifice to achieve what they want or to get to the person that they want? They might be kind of casting aside some of the ethical issues, right? They might not be thinking about that. Another thing is revenge. Now, a desire for revenge, this can be normal, like somebody hurt your family member. Wow, I'm in line to see you succeed in getting some kind of revenge, right? But there's okay revenge, there's measured revenge, and then there's the revenge that begins to consume a character and drives them to commit these increasingly drastic and morally dubious acts in pursuit of vengeance, often at the expense of humanity. Jealousy is another thing. We're all jealous in some way, but then it can tip to something really extreme. And also characters who are facing dire circumstances. I always say to writers, make your characters as uncomfortable as possible. Put them in difficult situations. Put them in a situation where they have no choice but to do something. Because so many times, once an inciting incident comes along, your character in real life, in a situation like most of us are in, we're going to be like, you know what? Yeah, I could take this opportunity, but I'm not desperate. I'm not going to do it. I'm not hungry. But our characters are. And here's the thing, with a character facing dire circumstances, they're going to resort to drastic measures. What does that mean? That can compromise their morals, and they can become increasingly antagonistic in the process. There's also characters who are charming. Oh, how sweet. They're charming. They're a flirt. They're cute. But the line between charm and manipulation, it's pretty fine, isn't it? And then you've got, the trauma, these traumatic experiences that can shape a character's worldview. And, PTSD can do a lot of things to people. So you have to think about those things. So when you're developing and portraying these traits effectively, this can really help you to write a compelling and realistic protagonist to antagonist arc. And it really showcases the complexity of human nature. I think that the potential for both heroism and villainy is present in all individuals, and it can become a little bit inflated in our novels, and that's not too bad. Now, is it important when you're writing this sort of arc to now come up with a new protagonist? That's what people often think. They're like, oh, well, now that the good guy became a bad guy, do I need to make the bad guy turn into a good guy, or what happens? No, not necessarily. It really depends on the story you're telling and the role of your character within it. So if the original protagonist transformation is driving the narrative forward and it's really providing a compelling, complete story, I think that you can do either way, right? Maybe you do need to introduce a new protagonist to carry the story forward if the arc is briefer and doesn't take the whole story. You see what I mean? So that's really important. Introducing a new protagonist, it can, give you more story, more runway. But ultimately, that decision really depends on the needs of your story and the direction you want to take it in. So remember that the introduction of a new protagonist is going to impact the overall narrative structure, the theme, the reader engagement, the pacing, the story arc, all of that stuff. Remember that it's really important for your plot, for your story not to get lost. So don't make this story arc get lost because you're so busy creating a character arc. They need to really go hand in hand and inform each other. I hope this helped. I just want this to help you to see the possibilities of this character arc and to kind of start to hint at the ways in which you can do this. And again, for more in-depth information or to apply this to your own writing, definitely reach out to me, give me a call, get onto my website, try to take one of my courses or get one of my notebooks that are going to be full of writing exercises that absolutely will help you to explore character arcs that are subtle and that can be surprising to your reader. That's it. I hope this helped. I look so forward to being with you next time on the How to Be an Author podcast. If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.